In the late 1960s, Highgate Cemetery in London fell into a state of Gothic decay. Overgrown with ivy and choked by weeds, the Victorian necropolis became a magnet for occultists. Passers-by began reporting a tall, dark figure lurking behind the iron gates. This was no ordinary ghost. It was described as a terrifying, semi-material presence with hypnotic, piercing eyes that chilled the blood. By 1970, the Highgate Vampire was a media sensation. Witnesses claimed to have seen a man in a long grey cloak and a top hat vanishing through solid stone walls. One man reported being pinned to the ground by an invisible force, while a young woman claimed to have been shadowed by a tall, thin, black figure that radiated an aura of ancient, predatory malice near the Swains Lane entrance. Two self-proclaimed vampire hunters emerged, David Farrant and Sean Manchester. Farrant viewed the entity as a psychic manifestation or a spectre, while Manchester insisted it was a king vampire, a medieval nobleman brought to England in a coffin by his followers. Their bitter public feud fueled a frenzy of headlines, turning the quiet suburb into a battlefield of egos and occult theories. On Friday, March 13, 1970, an ITV interview with the hunters triggered a massive vampire hunt. Hundreds of people, armed with stakes, crucifixes, and garlic, swarmed the cemetery. Police struggled to contain the mob as they climbed over walls and broke into catacombs. No vampire was found, but the event cemented the Highgate legend in the annals of British urban folklore forever. In the wake of the hunt, several tombs were found vandalized. Bodies were dragged from their lead coffins, and some were reportedly beheaded or staked. The authorities were horrified by the gruesome remains left behind by amateur hunters. The police increased patrols, but the sightings continued, with many believing the king vampire was merely hiding deeper within the subterranean vaults. Farrant and Manchester eventually challenged each other to a magical duel on Parliament Hill, though it never officially took place. Farrant was later arrested for witchcraft and desecration, by being found near the cemetery with a crucifix and a wooden stake. The legal battle that followed exposed the bizarre underbelly of London's modern occult scene to a bewildered public. Sean Manchester claimed to have tracked the vampire to a nearby Gothic mansion. He alleged that he broke into the cellar and found the entity sleeping in a coffin. According to his account, he staked the creature and set it on fire, ending the curse. Critics and skeptics, however, viewed his story as a fabrication, as no physical evidence of a dust-to-dust vampire execution ever surfaced. Other researchers suggested the vampire was actually the ghost of a monk or a Victorian gentleman who had committed suicide. The hypnotic eyes were attributed to the psychological phenomenon of limbic resonance, where the witness's own fear is projected back at them. Despite the state's claim, sightings of the tall, dark figure persisted well into the late 70s and early 80s. Highgate Cemetery remains the perfect stage for such a legend. Its Egyptian avenue and circle of Lebanon provide a haunting backdrop that blurs the line between reality and horror fiction. Even without a vampire, the heavy, silent atmosphere of the West Cemetery is enough to convince any visitor that the dead here do not rest as quietly as they should in their grand, stone villas. Today, the Highgate Vampire is a cult classic of paranormal history. It represents a unique moment when Victorian superstition collided with the 1970s counterculture. Whether it was a collective hallucination, a publicity stunt, or a genuine supernatural entity, the Vampire of Highgate remains the most famous resident of London's most beautiful city of the dead. In the height of the panic, locals discovered several foxes dead in the cemetery, their bodies drained of blood and marked with strange throat wounds. While skeptics pointed to stray dogs or disease, the vampire hunters used these carcasses as grim proof of a predatory presence. The image of the bloodless animals added a visceral, animalistic layer of terror to the Highgate legend. Sean Manchester claimed the vampire had relocated to a derelict Victorian house nearby. He described a night of terror, tracking the stench of decay through the basement. He alleged he found the creature's true coffin hidden behind a brick wall. This dramatic discovery mirrored the plots of Hammer horror films, blurring the line between a real investigation and an elaborate performance. In 1974, David Farrant was sentenced to prison for damaging memorials and interfering with dead bodies. The trial was a media circus, featuring testimony about black magic and voodoo. Farrant maintained his innocence, claiming he was only performing a psychic research ritual to communicate with the entity. His imprisonment momentarily silenced one of the case's most vocal figures. Researchers began digging into the cemetery's history to find the vampire's identity. Some linked the sightings to a 19th century nobleman who practiced the dark arts and was buried in an unconsecrated plot. This historical anchor gave the modern ghost story a sense of lineage, suggesting that the evil in Highgate wasn't new, but a centuries-old shadow finally waking from its slumber. The Highgate vampire craze coincided with London becoming the global capital of horror cinema. Nearby studios were filming Dracula movies, and the cemetery itself was a popular filming location. Some suggest the vampire was a psychological projection of the public's obsession with these films, a case where life imitated art so perfectly that the people began to see monsters in the mist. The heart of the sightings was the Circle of Lebanon, a sunken courtyard of tombs built around an ancient cedar tree. It is a place of absolute silence and deep shadow. Witnesses reported the vampire would glide between the tombs here before vanishing into the central tree. The circular architecture seemed to act as a psychic lens, focusing the eyes of anyone brave enough to enter. In later years, the British Psychical Research Society investigated the claims. They found that many sightings were likely optical illusions caused by the way street lamps cast long, distorted shadows through the iron railings. They concluded that the vampire was a classic example of social contagion, where a rumor becomes a perceived reality through the power of suggestion and fear. The road bordering the cemetery, Swains Lane, remains a hotspot for cold spots and sudden drops in temperature. Drivers still report seeing a tall figure in their rearview mirrors that isn't there when they turn around. The vampire has evolved into a more traditional road ghost, a lingering memory of the 1970s panic that refuses to be completely exorcised from the London pavement. Today, Highgate Cemetery is a well-maintained heritage site. The ivy has been cleared, and the vampire hunting has been strictly banned. The king vampire is now a piece of local trivia rather than a source of genuine fear. Yet, during the winter solstice or on a foggy London night, the Gothic gates still look like a portal to a world where a man in a grey cloak would still be waiting. Until their respective deaths, Farrant and Manchester never reconciled. They continued to trade insults in books and online forums for decades. Their lifelong battle ensured that the Highgate vampire would never be forgotten. It remains a story just about a monster, but about the human obsession with the unknown and our desperate need to believe that there is something lurking in the dark.